The cold morning fog hugged the edges of Central Park, blurring the city skyline into soft shades of gray and silver. A black limousine glided down Fifth Avenue, the kind that drew glances from passers-by for its sleekness alone. Inside sat Alexander Carter, a man whose name carried weight in every corner office and corporate boardroom in the country. Billionaire, innovator, ruthless businessman. People called him many things, some flattering, some not. But none ever called him kind. He leaned back in the plush leather seat, his gaze distant. His eyes, gray like the sky outside, reflected the quiet emptiness of a man who had everything money could buy. But nothing money couldn't. His world was built on contracts, mergers and figures that climbed higher every quarter. His calendar was filled, his reputation spotless, but his heart tired. In his hands he held a tablet showing a financial report. Numbers danced across the screen, his empire expanding even while he sat idle. Yet none of it stirred him. He set it aside and stared out the window, watching as the city passed by. The same city he'd helped shape with his investments, his name carved into its tallest towers. And yet, in that moment, he felt utterly detached from it all. He checked his watch, 8:35 a.m. His daughter Lily was supposed to be finishing her tutoring session. Her private tutor, a Harvard graduate with a sterling resume and an even shinier attitude, was worth every penny, or so the agency said. Alexander wasn't sure anymore. Lily had been struggling in math, and no amount of money seemed to fix that. But he was determined to make her perfect, just like everything else in his life. "Take me to the park," he told his driver. "Yes, sir." As the limousine slowed to a stop near the park entrance, Alexander saw her, Lily, his little girl, 7 years old, her chestnut curls bouncing as she sat cross-legged on a bench near the fountain. But what froze him wasn't her. It was who sat beside her. A young woman no older than 22, wrapped in a torn gray hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. Her sneakers were worn down to the threads, her backpack torn, stuffed with papers, notebooks, and a few dog-eared books. Her hair was tangled, her face pale from the chill, but her eyes, those were bright, focused, alive. Alexander frowned, his body tensing. "Who is that?" he asked sharply. His driver hesitated. "She wasn't here earlier, sir." "Would you like me to—" "Wait." He pushed open the door and stepped out into the crisp air. The gravel crunched beneath his expensive shoes as he approached. From a few steps away he could hear their voices. "Okay, Lily," the girl said gently, smiling through chattering teeth. "If you have 3 cookies and you give 1 to your friend, how many do you have left?" 2. Lily beamed proudly, her little hand scribbling the answer in her notebook. "That's right. See, math isn't scary, it's just sharing." Lily laughed, delighted. Her laughter, pure and full of life, cut straight through Alexander's chest like sunlight through fog. It was the kind of laughter he hadn't heard in too long. He stood there for a moment, watching his daughter's face glow with joy. Watching how this homeless girl, because that's what she clearly was, had managed to reach his child in ways that no expensive tutor ever could. When Lily noticed him, she jumped up, her pink coat bouncing as she ran to him. "Daddy, look! Miss Hope is teaching me math, and she made it fun." "Miss Hope?" he repeated, glancing at the young woman. She quickly stood up, clutching her backpack close to her chest, clearly embarrassed. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. I just saw your daughter struggling with her homework and you decided to help." Alexander's tone was unreadable. "Yes," she said quietly. "I used to study to be a teacher. I love helping kids learn." Her voice was soft but steady. There was a dignity in her words, even as the cold bit at her skin. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't trying to explain her life story. She was simply human. Alexander's sharp gaze studied her, taking in the dirt smudged on her sleeves, the frayed strings of her hoodie, the exhaustion behind her smile. Everything about her screamed struggle, but her eyes still carried warmth. "Where do you live?" he asked bluntly. She looked away. "Around. Sometimes the shelter, sometimes the library when it's open." His heart tightened slightly, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He had met powerful men, cunning minds, and ruthless competitors, but no one had ever stood in front of him with so little and so much grace. Lily tugged his hand. "Daddy, she's really good. Better than Miss Preston. She doesn't yell when I don't understand." Alexander knelt to meet his daughter's eyes. Lily, did you ask her to help you? No, Daddy. She saw me crying because I didn't get my math right. She sat down and helped me for free. Hope's face flushed. I just wanted to help her smile again, she said softly. That's all. Her sincerity left him speechless. People didn't do things just to help. Not in his world. Everyone wanted something, money, power, influence, but not this girl. She simply wanted to make a child smile. A cold gust of wind passed through and Hope shivered, hugging her thin arms. Without thinking, Alexander removed his cashmere scarf and held it out to her. She froze. I can't take that, she said quickly. It's cold, he replied, his tone firm but not harsh. You'll freeze before morning. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you, he nodded once. Then turning to his daughter, he said, It's time to go, sweetheart. Lily's face fell. But Daddy, can she come again tomorrow? Please? Alexander didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the girl standing by the bench, alone again, scarf wrapped around her neck, watching them leave with a quiet sadness. Something inside him stirred. Something that had been buried under years of wealth and walls of pride. As the car door closed, he couldn't shake her image from his mind. The silence in the car felt heavier than usual. Lily clutched her notebook, smiling. Daddy, she said, if I practice, I can be good at math like her. She said mistakes help us grow. He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She said that? Mm-hmm. Lily nodded enthusiastically. She said, when you fail, you're learning how not to give up. Alexander leaned back, staring at the roof of the car, his chest tightening again. He thought about how, in all his years of business, failure was the one thing he refused to accept. He built his empire on perfection. No mistakes, no emotions, no weakness. But this girl, this stranger with nothing, had just taught his daughter a lesson that even he hadn't learned. When they reached home, Lily ran upstairs, humming happily. The mansion, vast and silent, felt colder than ever. The marble floors reflected the glow of chandeliers, the kind of luxury that most could never imagine. But tonight, as Alexander stood by the window overlooking the city, all he could think about was that young woman sitting in the park, teaching his child with nothing but heart and knowledge. He called his assistant. Find out everything you can about a young woman named Hope, mid-20s, homeless, seen around Central Park this morning. I want a report on my desk by tonight. His assistant hesitated. Sir, may I ask why? Alexander looked out at the skyline, his reflection in the glass sharp and tired. Because my daughter learned more in 1 hour with her than in months with professionals. I want to know who she is. After hanging up, he poured himself a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. He thought about her words, her eyes, her quiet composure, even in her situation. People like her weren't supposed to exist in his world. They weren't supposed to challenge the order of things. But she had, and now he couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, while others slept comfortably in their warm homes, he imagined her out there, huddled under a thin blanket, reading a book by the dim streetlight, still dreaming of teaching, still believing in something. And though Alexander Carter had made billions by analyzing risks and returns, he realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. For the first time in years, he wanted to help someone without expecting anything back. The next morning dawned pale and cold, the kind of morning where even the sunlight seemed hesitant to touch the earth. Alexander Carter's limousine idled outside his estate as he stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, his mind still replaying yesterday's encounter. The image of that young woman, Hope, teaching his daughter on a park bench would not leave him. There was something in her tone, her grace, her sheer refusal to give up on a world that had given up on her, that gnawed at him. He was a man used to control. If he wanted something, he bought it. If he didn't want to see something, he paid for it to disappear. But this quiet act of kindness from someone who had nothing, had unsettled his carefully constructed world. When Lily came downstairs, bright-eyed and cheerful, she asked the question he knew was coming. Daddy, can we go see Miss Hope again today? He tried to hide his surprise behind the rim of his coffee mug. You really liked her that much? Lily nodded eagerly, her curls bouncing. She made math easy, and she told me that even if I mess up, I should smile and try again. Nobody ever said that before. He smiled faintly, though his chest ached. His daughter's world was one of perfect grades, piano lessons, and polished manners. Every moment managed by experts he paid to mold her into a future Carter. But Hope had managed to do what none of them could, reach her heart. Finish your breakfast, he said finally. We'll take a drive. An hour later, the limousine pulled into the park once more. The fountain sparkled under the morning light, but the bench was empty. Lily's face fell instantly. She's not here, she whispered. Alexander frowned and looked around. The park was quiet except for a few joggers and an old man feeding pigeons. He stepped out of the car, scanning the area, his instincts sharpening. For a man who managed global empires, this simple mystery felt deeply personal. Stay in the car, Lily, he said softly, then gestured to his driver. Find her. The driver nodded, and soon 2 security men, discreetly dressed but unmistakably professional, spread out across the nearby streets. Alexander walked the path where his daughter had sat, noticing the faint impressions of small shoes in the dust, and next to them, larger ones. Hers. Hope's. She'd been there, and she'd left behind the faint trace of someone who didn't belong but still tried to. Half an hour later, one of his men returned. Sir, we found her. Where? Behind the public library on 76th. She's sitting near the loading dock. Looks like she's been there all night. Alexander didn't wait. Take me there. When the car turned the corner into the narrow alley, the sight that greeted him made him pause. Hope sat curled against the cold brick wall, her head bent over a small notebook, writing something by the weak morning light. Her clothes looked thinner today, her fingers red from the chill. The scarf he'd given her was wrapped around her neck, a small, almost absurdly elegant splash of comfort in a world that had none for her. As he stepped out of the car, she looked up, startled. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes, the kind that comes from being too used to danger. Then when she recognized him, confusion replaced it. Mr. Carter, she said uncertainly. How did you? He held up a hand, silencing her questions. You shouldn't be out here, he said simply. She tried to smile. I'm fine. I've been through worse. Her voice carried that same soft composure, but he could see the truth. She wasn't fine. Her eyes were tired, her skin pale from lack of rest, and her body shivered even as she tried to look strong. He took a slow step closer. You helped my daughter yesterday. I just wanted to help, she said quickly, as if defending herself from some invisible accusation. She was crying. I couldn't just walk away. That's exactly why I'm here, he said. She blinked. What do you mean? He studied her quietly for a long moment. You said you wanted to be a teacher. What stopped you? Her gaze dropped to the ground. Life, she said after a pause. I was studying at the university. My mom got sick, so I started working 2 jobs to pay for her medicine. When she passed, I couldn't keep up with the rent or tuition. I lost everything. I thought I could get back on my feet, but it just got harder. One thing after another. Her tone was even, without bitterness. Just simple, honest exhaustion. Alexander had heard hundreds of stories of failure, people making excuses for their losses, pleading for sympathy or money. But this wasn't that. This was someone telling him the truth, not because she wanted anything, but because she had nothing left to hide. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. Be at this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. Tell the front desk my name. She stared at it like it was a mirage. Why would you do that? Because my daughter needs a real teacher, he said simply. And I think you deserve a second chance. Her eyes widened. I don't have any clothes for that kind of place. Or money for transportation. He nodded toward the car. You do now. Her lips parted in shock. Mr. Carter, I don't want charity. He cut her off with a firm look. It's not charity. It's a job offer. And I don't make offers twice. There was a pause, then slowly she took the card. Her voice trembled. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know, he said quietly. You already proved that. The next morning, Hope stood before the massive gates of the Carter mansion. The stone pillars rose like something out of a dream. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Her clothes were borrowed from the shelter, her hands clutching the card as if it might vanish. When she walked through the grand doors, she was met by a housekeeper who guided her to a bright study room where Lily sat waiting with an open notebook and an impatient grin. Miss Hope, Lily shouted, running to hug her. You came. Hope laughed softly, hugging the child back. Of course I did. We've got fractions to master. From the hallway, Alexander watched unseen. The sound of his daughter's laughter filled the room again, pure and happy. Something inside him relaxed. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a billionaire watching his investments. He felt like a father. Days turned into weeks. Hope's presence became a quiet rhythm in the house. Every morning she'd arrive punctually, sometimes wearing the same clothes, always with the same smile. She taught Lily not just math, but patience, creativity, compassion. The lessons turned into stories, games, songs. Lily's grades soared, but more importantly, her confidence bloomed. One afternoon, as Hope packed her books, Alexander walked into the study. "How's she doing?" he asked. "She's brilliant," Hope said, smiling warmly. She just needed someone to believe in her. He nodded, glancing at his daughter, who was humming while organizing her papers. "You've done more for her than I could have imagined." Hope blushed, lowering her gaze. "She's done just as much for me, sir." He hesitated. "You don't have to call me sir." She looked up, startled. "Then what should I call you?" "Alexander will do." She nodded slowly, her lips curving into a small smile. "All right. Alexander." Something in the way she said his name, hesitant yet brave, made his chest tighten. But not everyone was pleased. Within a week, the tabloids exploded with headlines. Billionaire hires homeless tutor. Paparazzi photos showed Hope arriving at his mansion, the scarf he'd given her still wrapped around her neck. The story spread like wildfire. His board of directors was furious. "Alexander, this is reckless," one of them barked during a meeting. "You're risking your reputation. Investors are asking questions. What message are you sending?" He sat at the head of the table, calm and collected, his hands steepled under his chin. "I'm sending the message that compassion isn't weakness," he said simply. They stared, confused. He leaned forward. "You think success comes from spreadsheets and mergers? It doesn't. It comes from people." She reminded me of that. "Sir?" one executive said coldly. "She's just a charity case." Alexander's voice turned to steel. "She's more than that. She's the best teacher my daughter has ever had. And she's the reason my daughter laughs again. So unless any of you can offer me something more valuable than that, this discussion is over." Silence fell across the room. When he returned home that night, he found Hope sitting with Lily in the garden, reading aloud from a tattered storybook. The fading sun painted their faces gold. The way Lily listened, the way Hope's voice softened. It was as if the world had shrunk to just that one perfect moment. Alexander stood there unseen again, realizing something he hadn't felt in years. This young woman who had nothing to her name had somehow filled his home with warmth he'd been missing all along. Later, as Hope packed up for the evening, he stopped her at the door. "Ignore the cameras outside," he said gently. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." She smiled faintly. "I don't mind. Let them see what kindness looks like." He stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he said, almost to himself, "You really believe the world can change, don't you?" "I have to," she replied softly. "If I don't, who will?" He watched her walk down the steps toward the waiting car, the scarf still fluttering around her neck. And for the first time in decades, Alexander Carter realized that maybe all the power and money in the world couldn't build what one heart full of faith could. The day the school opened, the city buzzed with quiet disbelief. Reporters gathered near the newly built community center in Brooklyn, where the sign above the gates gleamed under the morning sun. The Hope Foundation for Education. It stood tall and bright, painted in soft colors, surrounded by laughter from children who ran across the courtyard, holding new books and pencils still smelling of fresh paper. It wasn't just another charity project. It was a miracle stitched together from compassion and courage. Alexander Carter stood near the entrance, watching the scene unfold with a strange mixture of pride and humility. For once, he wasn't the man everyone bowed to. He wasn't the billionaire on magazine covers or the name whispered in boardrooms. He was just a man who'd seen something extraordinary in a girl the world had forgotten. And now that girl stood before him, no longer homeless, no longer shivering in the cold, but radiant, wearing a simple blue dress and holding a clipboard, her eyes alive with purpose. Hope moved from one classroom to another, checking on teachers, greeting children, ensuring everyone had what they needed. Her hair was tied neatly and her smile came easily now. But even as the cameras clicked and journalists tried to pull her aside for interviews, she never lost her humility. When she finally noticed Alexander watching from a distance, she walked up to him with the same warmth she had when they first met, just quieter now, deeper. "I still can't believe you did all this," she said softly. He smiled faintly. You did this, Hope. I just gave you the tools. She shook her head, emotion flickering across her face. You gave me more than tools. You gave me a life back. For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of the crowd faded into background music, the laughter of children, the hum of possibility. Alexander finally turned to look at the building. Do you remember the first day I found you? She nodded slowly. Behind the library. I thought you were going to send me away. I almost did, he admitted with a small chuckle. You scared me a little, you know? Her brow furrowed. Me scared you? He looked down, the faintest trace of vulnerability in his eyes. I've built my life on logic and numbers, but you showed me something I couldn't calculate. Kindness that asked for nothing. That terrified me more than any business risk ever could. Hope smiled, though her eyes shimmered with tears. Sometimes the things that scare us are the ones that save us. The day passed with celebration. Cameras flashed as children performed little songs and dances. Parents thanked Hope and the Carter family, and city officials praised the project as a turning point in community education. But when the speeches were over and the crowds faded, Alexander and Hope found themselves sitting on the front steps of the school. Just as the sunset bathed the sky in shades of gold and rose, Lily came running toward them, clutching a handmade card. Daddy, Miss Hope, look what I made. She held it up proudly, a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. One was clearly Hope, one was Lily, and the third was Alexander with an oversized tie and smile. Underneath, in a child's careful handwriting, it read, We are a family of learning. Alexander felt his throat tighten as he took the card. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Hope smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. You've got quite the artist there. She gets that from her mother, Alexander said softly, almost wistfully. She passed away when Lily was 2. After that, I threw myself into work. I thought success would fill the space she left, but it didn't. It only made the silence louder. Hope's gaze softened with understanding. You were trying to build something to replace what you lost. He nodded. And instead I built walls. She reached out, gently touching his hand. But you broke them. You gave the world something real. He looked down at her hand resting on his, the simple human connection grounding him more than all his wealth ever had. You taught me to, he said quietly. As the evening deepened, the school grounds began to empty. Parents waved goodbye. Children skipped home with new books clutched to their chests, and the last rays of sunlight kissed the sign above the gate. Hope stood there gazing up at it, the Hope Foundation for Education. When she turned to Alexander, her voice trembled slightly. You could have named it anything, after your company, after Lily, even after yourself. Why me? He studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he said, Because you're the reason this exists. You gave my daughter something no amount of money could buy. You taught her joy. You taught her patience. And in the process, you taught me something too. Hope blinked, overwhelmed. What did I teach you? That a man isn't measured by what he owns, he said softly, but by what he gives. The quiet sincerity in his voice left her speechless. She looked away, her heart full. Then I guess we both learned something. He smiled faintly. We did. A few weeks later, the story spread across the world. News channels aired interviews with Hope, showing her teaching in the bright, cheerful classrooms. People couldn't believe that the same woman, once homeless and forgotten, was now leading one of the most inspiring education programs in the country. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up. Other billionaires, skeptical at first, began investing in community schools too. The ripple effect of one simple act of kindness grew larger than anyone could have imagined. One evening, long after the media frenzy died down, Hope walked through the quiet halls of the school. She paused outside a classroom where Lily sat doing her homework. Alexander was beside her, helping her with the same kind of problems Hope had once explained on a park bench. The sight made her chest tighten with warmth. She turned away, walking down the hall lined with murals the children had painted. Bright colors, smiling faces, messages of hope. On one wall in big letters it read, "Learning changes everything." When she stepped outside, the air was cool, and the city lights sparkled like a reflection of all the dreams that had once felt impossible. She found Alexander standing by his car waiting. "Working late again," he teased gently. She laughed softly. "You know teachers never stop working," he smiled. And billionaires never stop learning, apparently. She tilted her head. Learning what? That life's best investments don't come with interest rates. They both laughed quietly, a sound easy and free, like two people who had finally found where they belonged. The months turned into a year. The school flourished. Hundreds of children were now attending classes, each one carrying a story not so different from Hope's, stories of struggle, loss, and resilience. And through it all, Hope never forgot where she'd come from. She visited shelters, libraries, and parks looking for others like her, young people who had lost their way but still held on to dreams. She brought them in, trained them, and gave them jobs. The foundation grew from 1 building to 10 across the state. Alexander remained quietly behind the scenes, funding, guiding, and, more than anything, believing. Whenever anyone asked him why he was doing it, he'd give the same answer. Calm and unwavering, because one person's kindness saved my family. Years later, at the anniversary celebration of the foundation, Hope stood on the stage addressing a crowd of hundreds. Alexander and Lily sat in the front row smiling proudly. Her voice, once timid, now carried strength and grace. "I was once a girl sitting on a park bench," she began, her words echoing through the auditorium. "I had no home, no family, and no reason to believe in tomorrow. But one little girl believed in me, and her father saw something worth saving. Together they changed my life, and in doing so gave me the chance to change others." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Cameras flashed, but Hope's eyes found Alexander's in the audience. For a moment, the world fell away. After the event, they walked outside together into the cool evening air. The city glowed around them, but neither seemed to notice. "You've built something extraordinary," Alexander said quietly. Hope smiled. "We built it," he nodded. "Do you ever miss the quiet days in the park?" She laughed softly. "Sometimes. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. That day I thought I was just helping a little girl with her math homework. I didn't know it would lead me here." He looked at her, the corners of his eyes softening. "Neither did I. You know, I used to think success was measured by the size of my empire. Now I realize it's measured by the lives we touch." Hope's eyes glistened. "Then you're richer than you've ever been," he chuckled. "Maybe so." Lily came running toward them, wrapping her arms around Hope's waist. "Miss Hope, can I help you teach tomorrow?" Hope bent down, smiling. "Of course you can, sweetheart. You're the best helper I have." As they walked toward the waiting car, Alexander looked at the two of them, his daughter and the woman who had changed everything. He felt something he hadn't in years, a deep, steady peace. When he opened the door for them, he glanced back at the school, its windows glowing in the dark like 1,000 small promises. He thought about that first day again, the park bench, the cold air, the frightened but determined girl teaching his daughter with nothing but heart. If he hadn't stopped to look closer, he might never have seen her. He might never have learned what true wealth really meant. The city around them pulsed with life, but for Alexander Carter, the noise faded into silence, a silence filled with gratitude. He looked at Hope and said softly, "You taught me the one lesson I never learned in business." She smiled, curious. "What's that?" "That the best returns come from giving without expecting anything back."